Welcome back to the floral alphabet. Today we'll be finally stitching the flower. Keep watching. Before we even start, I want to show you a small trick I'm using to speed up my stitching. I'm threading 4 needles, or how many needles I need, with all the shades I'll be using for this particular project. This will speed up my stitching, and to be honest, I don't like spending time threading my needles. That is super annoying. So once I reach that flow, it's much easier to switch between the shades. This is really useful to make your stitching faster. Before starting to stitch the flower, first outline all petals with split stitch using one strand of DMC Red Dark. When filling our first petal, we'll start filling the first row of long and short stitch with the shade Coral DMC 351. After stitching the first row, and as you see I only stitched a tiny bit of the petal, I will be stitching my second row using a darker shade of Coral, the DMC 350, Coral Medium. When stitching the flower, we'll be using needles sharps size 9 or size 10. I prefer using the size 9 because I find them a bit easier to thread. It's time to stitch our third row. We'll be using an even darker shade of red, the DMC 498 Red Dark. Fill in this third row until your petal is completed. A few things to consider when stitching the petals, and this applies to all petals, not just the ones I will demonstrate in this video. First of all, let's see why we outlined in the first place these petals. The reason for that is we need to create this illusion that one petal sits on top of another. We will be starting with the petals that sit in the back, so that's why I started with this tiny petal, and then I will be stitching the next tiny petal to next the left one. Now the reason is exactly how I was saying. We need to start from the elements that sit in the back and then build on top of each other the elements that sit in the front. And now this is very strongly related with another thing you need to consider when stitching the petals. In general, and in our pattern here, when stitching long and short stitch, you always start from the outside of the shape you're trying to fill. So we are starting to fill our rows from the outside towards the inside. When you'll start from the outside, you are hugging the outline, so we need to cover it, but we are not hugging the bottom one. That is going to be hugged when we fill the next shape, the next petal. So do not hug the bottom. In my case, it's top because this is how I'm holding my hoop. But like that bottom, I am leaving it for the next petal. This will create that illusion that the next petal and the next petal are basically sitting on top of these petals I'm stitching first. For the second petal, I'll be using the same shades as my previous petal, starting my long and short stitch, the first row with DMC Coral. That would be the lightest shade for this petal. on and fill the second row, same as the previous petal, using the coral medium. And now for the third row, same as the previous petal, use the red dark, DMC 498. Go on and fill this third row until your petal is completed. Now one thing you'll notice, my stitching is a bit irregular. The reason for that is, again, you have to think about the real life and a real life example, and understand the shades we are using are just a way to mimic real life. So I'm using 3 shades of red for these first petals. One is the lightest, then a medium and a dark shade of red, of coral red. The darkest, obviously it has to sit at the bottom, so that's where my shadows would sit in real life, and the lighter shade at the top, so when the light is where the light is hitting my petal in real life. So that's the reason why my shading is a bit irregular, and it brings me back again at my previous video. So it's not gonna be stitch a row, a band, a straight band of light, then medium, then dark. So it has to be irregular just to create a realistic effect. Now we'll be moving to our next petal. This is where we'll introduce the lightest shade used for stitching this flower. This would be the Coral Light. Now I use the Anchor brand because I just didn't have this shade at home, but that would be the DMC 352 Coral Light. The first row will be stitched in the same manner, irregular long and short stitches, and make sure to hug the outline. The best way to use this video is in addition with the PDF you have downloaded. I try my best there to explain every step, from the order of work to images with the progress, illustrations for the stitches, so you have everything you need. But if you're like me, sometimes it's better to watch the stitching done than to read about it. For this petal, we will be using all 4 shades of red, starting from the outside, from the lightest shade, the Coral Light, gradually stitching towards the inside to the red dark, the darkest shade. So I'll be using 4 shades of coral for this petal and most of the rest of the petals. Starting from Coral Light, going to the Coral, Coral Medium, and Red Dark, the darkest shade. When you're done shading the entire flower, we need to outline again each petal in order to increase a bit the contrast. As you see, the petals look a bit like they are blending into each other, and this is what we don't want. This is a great technique to increase contrast and define a bit better the shapes. Use one strand of thread with garnet medium. This is the darkest red we'll be using when stitching this pattern. At the final step, add a few French knots in the middle of the flower just to create a bit more detail. Use 4 strands of thread and DMC garnet medium. This was it, guys. So we finished stitching this beautiful letter. I really hope you found useful this video. Don't forget you can use Maker 20 at checkout when downloading the pattern from my Etsy shop. This is really a beginner friendly pattern, but if you have any type of questions, I'm always here to help, so you can message me or email me on the blog. Now until next time, happy stitching, guys, and take care.